Good morning, everybody. This is a live severe weather update with a discussion of the target areas ahead during the coming week. I'm seeing a dry line event in western Oklahoma on Monday that looks like more of a marginal severe weather event. A couple of isolated supercells developing. And I'm also seeing severe weather arriving to Illinois on Tuesday with an arc of supercells. Looks like a more robust tornado threat during the day on Tuesday, as far north as eastern Iowa into central Illinois on that day. Looks like a classic early spring event where it's going to feel cold. The dew points may not seem high enough, but you have so much cold air aloft this early season that it can still squeeze out enough instability for supercells and a tornado threat. And then the focus shifts to the southern United States again. And on Wednesday overnight, I'm seeing the eastern Texas Piney woods into Louisiana being active with all hazards possible. And on Thursday, a more conditional threat for maybe a tornado outbreak over the similar areas that were impacted by the last event during March 17. I'm going to break down those models as well. But the event on Thursday is much more conditional. There is a little bit more model discrepancy because it's a little bit further out. But if it does come together, then I do see a tornado outbreak threat across similar areas that were impacted by the severe weather event on March 17. And I'm also going to go over last week, a bit of a recap of the storm chase last week. You can see the video playing down there below. That is actually the Clarendon Ef2 Tornado that was rated an Ef2. And let me show you this video here playing the approach of the cone. This is on that road just to the north of Clarendon between Howardick and Clarendon, and heading off to the north. This is at north-south road. You can see I was trying to get through the RFD here to gain visual of the cone. Already had visual of the cone though, but really wanted to get right up next to that corner flow. I pretended that I was a parcel in the surface inflow area, surging toward that corner flow where the flow bends upward. So the corner flow is where that surface inflow, the parcels will be approaching the vortex, and then where they turn that sharp upward direction. That's called the corner flow in the vertical. And that could be if you have a low swirl ratio tornado, one of those point vortices, basically like a jet, going all the way in toward the center point of the vortex before you're forced up. But with these larger cones, they get a pocket of sinking air in the middle that pushes the corner flow out a little bit, the radius of those stronger winds. But in this case, as the tornado was weakening and roping out, it almost regained that low swirl configuration. And then off to the right, just in the field, to the east of this road, I saw a tree rocket in the vertical, probably about 150 mile per hour vertical winds in the straight up direction. So as this tornado was weakening, it underwent some vortex breakdown, and one of those sub-vortices was a really low swirl ratio sub-vortex with winds in the straight-up vertical, just ripping in the vertical direction. But this tornado was rated an Ef2, and it actually went right through downtown Clarendon before intensifying. It went through town as a little bit weaker of a tornado, and then really ramped up. And now I'll show you the damage survey from this day. This was a that would be Thursday. So here were the reports from this event, which was March 13, 2021 in the Texas Panhandle. This was a moderate risk, over 30 preliminary tornado reports. A couple of those were rated Ef2. One of them crossed I-27 near the Happy area. That was the strongest tornado of the day. That was rated Ef2. We were on that storm from birth, but then had a lack of east options after it produced that first Ef0 tornado. It was actually rated an Ef0 when that condensation was reaching all the way to the ground. A very weak swirl as well. It's debatable as to whether that initial tornado was a tornado. We were right up next to it. But that same storm then went off to the northeast and produced the wedge that crossed Interstate 27 very near the Happy, Texas area. Show you the damage survey here from NWS Amarillo. And then I'm going to go through and discuss each target area next week and break down those models. But first, wanted to do a quick recap here. So this is the Happy Texas Tornado, and it included an EF1 satellite, but this tornado was rated an EF2. This was one of the tornadoes that we just saw the right edge of this as we were trying to catch it coming up Interstate 27 there. But this one was rated an EF2 with max winds of 115 miles an hour. And I thought that this was the strongest tornado of the day, but actually the Clarendon Texas Tornado had peak winds of 120 miles an hour. That one got up over 3/4 of a mile wide. That's the one that I just showed you the video of there to the north of Clarendon. It was actually quite a bit wider as we were trying to go through town to try to gain visual of that tornado. But this is the first one that touched down to the west of I-27. There were even 2 tornadoes in the ground at one time, including the Happy satellite there at an EF1, and then the main parent tornado that went all the way up toward Palo Duro Canyon. Now let me show you the damage survey for the next one, which was the Groom Tornado, and then I could show you video of that one as well. And again, this is just a breakdown of the March 13 event. But this was a little bit further east, a different storm that was coming up from the south. This was the second storm down after that EF1 tornado. The tracks that you see on the left side are actually from that original storm that produced the Happy EF2 wedge that crossed I-27. And then you can see that EF0 unknown in the upper right-hand portion of the screen. That was one of the tornadoes that we documented, and was quite a large wedge. We believe that there could have been a couple of different tornadoes out there, but this one was just to the south of I-40. This was the second storm that was coming up from the south. The next tornado that we got near Clarendon was actually the third supercell storm. This track right here, this shows the tail end of the Happy wedge down in the bottom left, and then it produced an EF1 that went right through Palo Duro Canyon. And then it had an EF0 tornado up just to the west of Claude. And we were coming on I-40 here trying to catch back up with this storm. Had to bypass this storm as it crossed into the stable air. Continued off to the east, and then we dropped to the south. Actually, we dropped to the south over toward Groom, and we were looking off to the west and saw this Wedge tornado that developed. And let me show you that video really quickly here. This is the Groom tornado. And we were a little bit further away from this tornado than we would have liked due to road network and the storm just occluding out there. But here you can see the Groom wedge. I caught a couple of seconds of that wedge at the beginning. There you can see it on approach. Pretty wide tornado, and this is an EFU, so there's no damage survey on this tornado. It's in the middle of nowhere there, well to the southwest of Groom. We're just to the south of Groom, looking off to the west. Let me show you this tornado too, and it roped out looking off to the west. And Blake Brown, my chase partner on this day, was working very closely with the National Weather Service out of Amarillo to confirm these tornadoes. And here you can see as it was roping out, it turned into this compact stovepipe there. That's looking to the southwest of Groom quite a ways. EFU tornado, unknown. Probably a pretty strong one though. I wouldn't be surprised if this was also an EF2, probably with those winds near 120 miles an hour out there in the Texas Panhandle. That tornado is that EFU in the upper right-hand portion of the screen. That was this tornado. It started off as a wedge. And we were on this road just to the south of Groom, looking back to the west. We were hoping that this would come right toward our location, but as is often the case with these large tornadoes that occlude like this, they usually do a left-hand turn, and that's exactly what this tornado did. Instead of coming up straight toward our location, it did this left-hand turn, and we had to watch that tornado from a distance, a couple of miles away at least, probably 3 miles away. You can actually see it was about 4 miles away based on this distance, with each of those blocks representing 1 mile. But if this tornado had continued to move northeast, we would have intercepted it on that road just to the south of Groom. And we almost had a perfect storm chase. If we were on that Happy Texas storm from birth out there to the southwest of I-27, saw its first tornado confirmed in EF0, even though it's still debatable as to whether that was a tornado or not. but we could have intercepted this tornado on I-27, went up through Amarillo, east on I-40, potentially even intercepted some of these storms to the northeastern side of the Palo Duro Canyon. And then we would have dropped south and intercepted this tornado on the next one, which was a wedge. And then we continued off to the southeast and then got the next tornado down near Clarendon, which I just showed you the video of. And I could show you the results of that damage survey as well right now. And this was a Clarendon tornado that I just showed you at the beginning of this, back when it was a cone to the north of Clarendon. See the happy satellite, and there it is. And there was actually a second tornado that was analyzed by the next storm coming up that was rated an EF0. That was the next storm coming up, but this is the main tornado damage track. And we saw it, gained visual of this looking to the south of Clarendon. It was a cone tornado on that ridge just to the south of town. We waited for it, considered going north, waiting for it, but figured we'd come back through town, try to see if we could gain visual of that tornado down to the west side of Clarendon. Basically just saw a little surge in the southerly winds there. I think that tornado, as it was going through Clarendon, was weakening or maybe lifted just here. Town is kind of in a valley there with hills on the south side of town, and definitely had a well-defined cone coming into Clarendon. Thankfully, it looks like it went just to the west of downtown. We did try to sample that wedge tornado, then we came back into town and then went north. A couple of chasers that were stopped in the middle of the road there, I had to go by them, and then we continued unimpeded all the way up to intercept that tornado near the Howardwick area to the north of Clarendon when it came back across the interstate as a weaker tornado. But out here near this reservoir north of Clarendon, it actually got up to 3/4 of a mile wide. It was rated an EF2, did some damage out there to some cottages along that reservoir. And then the tornado curved back toward the north-south road here to the north of Clarendon. And that's when we were able to intercept it. It was weakening at that time, just kind of one of those elevated bulbs as the tornado was weakening after it was a wedge earlier out here. And then off to the right, you can see trees rocketing upward at about 100 miles an hour just in that field immediately to our right. So according to the damage survey, these estimates, this was actually the strongest tornado of the outbreak there in the Texas Panhandle. And quite an honor to be all over that storm. Show it to you here again. Here is that EF2 tornado approaching it from the south to the north of Clarendon. You can gain visual of the right edge here. The tornado is still quite wide, probably a half mile, quarter mile at this time, but starting to constrict. And this was an EF2 tornado to the north of Clarendon. You can see it's wrapped in the rain, and I'm approaching from the south. The wind was out of the west, largely RFD here to the south of the tornado. I pay deep attention to the wind direction as I'm storm chasing, especially at night and in these rain-wrapped situations. You can basically envision the supercell tornado diagram in your head. You could see these winds around the tornado. I could see the vortex in front of us. I could see the westerlies. And my goal was to get through these westerly winds, punch through the RFD to gain more of a clean visual of that cone tornado. At this time, it was starting to constrict. Blake and Brenda were in the car here. Blake and Brenda Brown, both well-trained veteran storm chasers out there and meteorologists. And we are approaching from the south here. You can see a lot of debris. I was a little bit concerned about the power lines on the left, given the westerlies on the south side of this tornado. I was keeping a very close eye on that. Usually the westerlies in the RFD portion are not quite strong enough to down those power poles, but you still got to be aware of the power poles coming in from the west. And as you get a little bit closer to the corner flow, that's when the winds could become even more damaging and could throw those telephone poles into the vehicle. So I'm definitely keeping a very close eye on the telephone poles on this approach from the south. I wish that I had the subsonic sensor so that I could measure those pressure falls inside the tornado. Would have been some incredibly dramatic data here. But when I flew out to cover this tornado with the rental car approach, I actually forgot the subsonic sensor. It is a difficult thing to fly with anyway. I am going to have the subsonic sensor, though, for this week ahead for Tuesday in Illinois, Wednesday night down in Dixie Alley, southeastern Great Plains, eastern Texas Piney Woods into Louisiana. And then on Thursday, looks like central and southern Mississippi into central and southern Alabama once again. But this is that Ef2 tornado. Intercepted just to the north of Clarendon. This is the result of the National Weather Service damage survey from Amarillo. And again, 30 preliminary reports across the Texas Panhandle. These from the Storm Prediction Center. These are preliminary reports. I believe over 50 tornadoes, though, on Thursday. So here, the next day, last week, after the Texas Panhandle event, I then went off to the north to chase the cold core. You can see there were 2 tornado reports, one in far northwestern Kansas, another one there in southwestern Nebraska. I missed by about a half an hour, but you may remember that very vigorous convection along that west to east oriented band as this upper level system became vertically stacked from the low levels up aloft, stretching of that vorticity along a west to east oriented line. Convection would develop in the more well-mixed air, the more unstable air, and then slide into that moisture. Temperatures dropping into the upper 40s, squeezing out a couple vortices, non-supercell tornadoes, but you can't even get some short-lived mesocyclones and miniature supercell structures with those types of events. And then the next day, there were more cold core tornadoes just to the south of the Kansas City area, and this was the day before the big outbreak on Thursday, so I had to go back up to Colorado, return my rental car, and then considered logistics to get back into Dixie Alley, but you could see another 2 tornadoes. One of them produced some roof damage there just to the south of the Kansas City area, but a couple of more tornadoes were produced there. And then the very next day wasn't quite the outbreak. This is on March 16th. But the overnight, there was a tornado confirmed in western Oklahoma, a supercell storm there that initially had a severe thunderstorm warning, gradually drilled down to the surface. That low-level mesocyclone became strong enough to squeeze out a tornado there in western Oklahoma. And also the night before, there were a couple renegade storms that developed along the warm front there near the Jackson area, just to the southeast of Jackson, Mississippi. Squeezed out a couple of tornado reports there as well. By this time, I had made it into Little Rock. It was really the only place I could rent a car with a debit card. I know in Mississippi and Louisiana, I don't think you can use a debit card to rent vehicles. So I got an early night sleep in Little Rock and then woke up very early to get down to Meridian. Didn't quite get down there early enough because then I would have seen the tornado of the day just to the south of Meridian by about 1 p.m. to the west of Waynesboro. Stovepipe tornado that developed in a clean atmosphere there. There was also a renegade storm that developed just to the northeast of Selma, Alabama. That was a lead renegade that eventually crossed Interstate 65 well to the south of the Tuscaloosa-Birmingham area. Another supercell also went northward through Tuscaloosa, producing a tornado. That was this track right here near the Moundville area. Don intercepted that one with his drone in the air. This was that lead renegade that crossed I-65 well to the southeast of Birmingham. And then we had this zone. This was where that initial tornado touched down at 1 p.m. And then numerous supercells traveled along that same zone. There was a surface pressure trough down in this area across southern Mississippi into central Alabama. And basically any supercell that developed along that line had the chance of producing a tornado. And then there were a couple other tornadoes up here in far southwestern Missouri right along the surface low track. I know a couple of storm chasers were on that. Max Olson and Gage Shaw were up in that area, chasing right along the surface low track into the Ozarks. Got a tornado there. And then the main convective line kind of underperformed back to the west, but still a couple of tornado reports across far northern Louisiana into southeastern Arkansas. And also a couple of tornadoes in northeastern Mississippi, kind of on the stable side of that pressure trough, surface pressure trough there, prefrontal trough, whatever you want to call it. A lot of times these events in Dixie Alley, supercells will initiate on those little subtle convergence lines or prefrontal pressure troughs that will develop out ahead of the front and will track into the open warm sector like this, producing tornadoes. That's exactly what happened. And I was kind of messing around with storms here along the western side of that pressure trough, thinking that there'd be a better chance of supercells to turn right into that clean, untainted air instead of just tracking over the same area. I got on that Silas storm just to the east of Silas. Could see the right edge of that wedge as it went right into the jungle. We're on a couple of other tornado-warned storms along that zone into southwestern Alabama. Launched the drone there up near Gilberton. Looks like it had condensation all the way to the ground, but you could tell by the abundance of fog and the low-level condensation under that storm that it was definitely tracking over similar areas that earlier storms had tracked over. So largely underperformed on this day. It's been happening a lot recently over the last 5 years or so at Dixie Alley. I seemed to do a lot better there about 10 to 15 years ago when I had less information coming in, less radar updates, kind of chasing more the general evolution of the outbreak as a whole, and seemed to work a little bit better. Now you get so much information, so many opinions flooding in, storm chasers here, there, meteorologists like this area, that area, radar coming in, tornadoes already on the ground, tornado here, do I go north, east, got to navigate. Next thing you know, it's just mass chaos out there, and then the outbreak will pass you by. My aggressive storm chasing strategy seems to work pretty well out in the plains. Sometimes it'll work well in Dixie, but it's definitely high risk, high reward out there when you're chasing. Sometimes you'll miss those tornadoes quite a bit as well. But over 50 preliminary reports there across Dixie Alley, and then across the Carolinas mid-Atlantic zone. There were more tornadoes reported to the north of the Raleigh area, at least a couple of tornadoes up there along that surface low track. So that's really the recap for last week's outbreak. And now I want to start discussing next week's target areas and also a model breakdown of next week. This is the first target area for Monday. I do think that there is a chance for the dry line to happen, even though it looks like dew points are going to be in the low, maybe the middle 50s out there. I do think that there is a chance for a narrow instability axis to develop, especially southwestern Oklahoma, just to the south of that surface low along that dry line. I think that there could be a very narrow little instability axis coming into western Oklahoma. Probably more of an isolated supercell structure, maybe some hailers out there, maybe a couple isolated severe thunderstorms. But I think that the more robust tornado potential is going to be on Tuesday in central Illinois as this system ejects. And that's where I've got my target area. Up on Tuesday, central Illinois, maybe even eastern Iowa, though. I should have definitely extended this target area into far eastern Iowa, near the Davenport area. Basically, Davenport down toward Effingham looks like to be where that arc of supercells is going to set up. And you also have a low-level jet in excess of 50 knots out there. A lot of times these events end up happening in Iowa, so I could see eastern Iowa being the target. But my plan is to leave late Monday night or early Tuesday morning from upstate South Carolina and then head northwest and target this day. And then on Wednesday, I think that there could be a nighttime threat as Dixie Alley is about to come alive once again. Wednesday looks like East Texas Piney Woods, maybe southern Arkansas, northern Louisiana type of a target area. That's where I'm watching on this day. Next, I'll probably drop south from the Illinois target to cover this nocturnal threat on Wednesday. And some of the models, especially the GFS, is showing a potential tornado outbreak on Thursday once again. Portions of Dixie Alley, central southern Mississippi, into central and southern Alabama look to be that target area. And there's a little bit more uncertainty with this event. Some of the models aren't really showing the quick evolution of that system behind the one that's going to produce those tornadoes in central Illinois on Tuesday. Another system comes in behind it, but you can start to see the writing on the wall for how this spring is going to go. These systems are going to ramp up across the southwestern U.S., sometimes even close off and then meander across Tornado Alley, the southern U.S., and that's going to be producing severe weather likely through April. The long range, though, after this next week is looking a little bit quieter. It's looking like there's more of a ridge trough pattern across the U.S., so I could see probably a 10 to 14-day breather after this coming week of severe weather, and then the second half of April could get active once again, just kind of playing out the timing of these systems. I think that there's going to be a big pattern shift after this upcoming week, whereas this upcoming week will look a lot like last week in terms of storm chasing. Maybe playing out a little bit different since the moisture isn't arriving to the southern plains in time for the Monday event to really go big. If this week were happening in May, you'd probably be talking about tornado outbreaks, big-time severe weather, more instability, a more wide-open Gulf. But instead, we're going to be talking about an active severe weather event, but not until Tuesday, probably in Illinois, more fueled by the cold air aloft. And then Wednesday, Thursday, I could see the evolution of a pretty big event down there in Dixie Alley. So now let's break down these models just a little bit more. We can look at some of the forecast soundings. I am planning on resuming the Storm Chase EDU courses this week. Keep that in mind. Those are provided exclusively for Facebook supporters. So I'm excited to resume those classes once again. But now let's look at the models, and this is the system coming up for Monday and Tuesday. Tuesday looks like the bigger day, but interestingly, we kind of have a hybrid La Nina, El Nino pattern. So you do have this kind of split flow pattern. The jet wants to punch up into Canada, the primary polar front jet, but then this system off to the south will usually cut off and then meander into the southern plains and the southern U.S. as the core of the jet gets pushed up into Canada, and then another system will come in and then do exactly the same thing. So you can see this system is a bit positively tilted here over the western U.S. It does have a subtropical connection. You can also see the core of the polar front jet lifting up into Canada, but this thing's going to close off and become a big-time system as we go into the early part of next week. And this is caused by this subtropical connection. So you can see the southern branch of the jet stream here basically interacting with the base of this trough. That causes this trough to deepen. It causes, in general, for cyclonic vorticity to be generated at the base of the trough. That causes the trough to continue to deepen around the Four Corners region, which is a favorable position to deepen for the southern plains to really pull up that moisture. But last week's systems were so strong that the Gulf of Mexico was quite cleared out. So this initial system on Monday, this initial severe weather event is going to be dealing with some marginal moisture along that dry line. Looking at the dew points here, this is the NAM model. You can see dew points basically in the low 50s up along the dry line into western Oklahoma, but given such cold air aloft, that still might even be enough to squeeze out some surface-based supercells there along the dry line in western Oklahoma. Kind of comes together with the daytime heating, that trough ejection. But there is that instability axis developing into southwestern Oklahoma. Storms developing by about 3 or 4 p.m. Pretty steep lapse rates in the lowest 3 kilometers. 68 over 54 is not bad. Those dew point spreads of about 14, 15. Get a lot of dry air aloft as well. You can see quite a bit of directional shear in the low levels. Definitely some steep lapse rates in the lowest 3 kilometers. The rate at which the temperature cools with height is quite dramatic there in the low levels, so a lot of surface-based instability. And then this hodograph. Look at that hodograph right there just below to the bottom left of the screen. Definitely a nice sickle-shaped hodograph, favorable for supercell storms with your 3, 4, 5, 6 kilometer winds, about 40 to 50 knots, more than sufficient to evacuate that rain and hail from the updraft. And then your 1 kilometer wind at about 40 knots, south-southwest. Surface wind, even a little easterly component, due south, about 20 knots. That creates about 20 knots of 0 to 1 kilometer shear. Critical angle, about 70 degrees. So the wind shear profiles are quite favorable across this western Oklahoma dry line for some severe weather. If I were in Oklahoma living out there, I would definitely storm chase on this day, and then maybe even Illinois on Tuesday. Coming from the east, I'm planning on targeting Illinois on Tuesday and then dropping down into Dixie on Wednesday and Thursday. You can see this instability gets pinched off into northwest Texas by 0Z as that front begins to dominate. So it looks like there's going to be a narrow window for supercell storms in southwestern Oklahoma, probably about 3 to 5, 6 p.m. maybe, and then that instability gets pinched off into northwestern Oklahoma. But a nice low-level jet axis out there. I haven't looked at the HRRR model yet to see if it convects the dry line, but I assume it does. Usually these setups will produce over a very narrow window across western Oklahoma. This is the dry line, low-level jet axis just off to the east of it about 40 to 50 knots. You also get some low 50s dew points. And this early in the storm season, you get a lot of cold air aloft, so you could squeeze out about an axis of about 1,000 joules per kilogram Cape here into western Oklahoma by about 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time. So down there near Altus, Elk City, down toward Altus on Monday afternoon. Certainly looks like an interesting setup. And before that instability gets pinched down into northwestern Texas. But then the threat shifts toward Illinois as the system ejects quite rapidly. And actually, the NAM model has better instability across western Oklahoma on the dry line. Out here in western Illinois, it's got about 500 to 750 Cape. But there is still quite a bit of wind shear out there, looking at the low-level jet. Across western Illinois, here's their 850 low. The atmosphere is trying to evolve similarly as it did last week, but some subtle differences. You don't have a big blizzard in Colorado, of course. Not quite as strong of a vertically stacked upper-level system, but it is enough to generate a 50-knot low-level jet across central Illinois, just to the east of a warm sector, co-located with that arc of Cape of about 500 to 750 joules per kilogram there, western Illinois into eastern Iowa. And I bet that once you get a little bit closer with the HRRR, it's probably going to show even more substantial instability. A lot of times you get an elevated mix layer that will overspread this zone. Looking at the 1 kilometer storm relative helicity, quite a bit of 250 to 300, 200 plus 0 to 1 kilometer shear from eastern Iowa down into central Illinois, even down toward the Missouri boot heel. Quite a bit of wind shear there beneath the core of that low-level jet. And beautiful photographs. You know, even though you're talking mid-50s dew points, look at these wind fields. 50 knots, a lot of directional shear there. Just an absolute beaut of a photograph, critical angle, 60 degrees, 1 kilometer wind of about 55 knots out of the due south. Surface wind nicely backed out of the due southeast, and then your 3, 4, 5, 6 kilometer winds pretty strong out of the southwest and northeast at 40 to 50 knots. Quite a moist profile, likely holding down some of the Cape, but I bet when the HRRR model comes out, you're going to see a more stout, elevated mix layer over Illinois, and probably even greater than 1,000 Cape out there in that arc shape from central Illinois into eastern Iowa. A lot of wind shear, too, down in northern Mississippi there. You got to wonder if this is going to be like last year where I head all the way up into central Iowa, get a little bird fart tornado, and then down near Jonesboro, they get a massive tornado. This is the energy helicity index predicted by the NAM, and we can actually go to the new 12Z NAM now. And the 12Z NAM actually shows the best co-location of the low-level shear and the instability across southeastern Missouri into southwestern Illinois, with that arc extending up through western Illinois into eastern Iowa. So it's very possible I could end up kind of near the Poplar Bluff area down toward Caruthersville. Very favorable photographs, temperatures in the 60s, dew points in the mid to upper 50s. Kind of a low-end instability day, but pretty high wind shear there. So I do think that Tuesday could be quite an interesting day somewhere, whether I'm in the Missouri boot heel into southwestern Illinois or play further up the arc into western Illinois there. And there are some model discrepancies, of course, as we go toward Wednesday night with the timing of that next system coming in behind it. Similar to last week, there's going to be a 1-2 punch of storm systems again. And the early system kind of weakens as it lifts through the eastern Great Lakes, and then this system is even stronger coming in behind it. Very similar to last week with this 1-2 punch coming in. This is the new GFS is just coming in. But you can see, again, this next system. This is on Wednesday. You can see a bit of a subtropical connection once again, digging at the base of the trough, causing it to close off just to the west of the southern plains. And that's going to lead to Wednesday and Thursday being quite active downstream. I know that there have been a lot of comparisons with 2011 and the super outbreak. But in 2011, you had a consolidated jet across North America with open wave after open wave passing across the country. This time you have a bit of a hybrid pattern, almost a hybrid El Nino, La Nina, where you get advantages for severe weather from both patterns. But then this is on Thursday as that trough ejects, and you get kind of the formation of this massive trough across the western and central U.S. with that system kind of ejecting within that cyclonic flow, subtropical ridge off to the southeast of it. But you can see how the timing of this could definitely change. This system's kind of shearing out, kind of getting squeezed between the subtropical ridge to its southeast and the formation of this mean trough across the western and central U.S. So there is going to be quite a lot of uncertainty with the timing of this trough ejection and exactly where that low-level jet sets up. Of course, right now, as of even the 6Z GFS, you have a big 50 to 60 knot low-level jet across central and southern Mississippi into Alabama. This would be quite favorable for big severe weather, but we just need to monitor this over the coming days because that trough ejection is going to be, in terms of its timing, there's a lot of uncertainty associated with the trough that's just getting squeezed out over top of that subtropical ridge. Some of the long-range models are then showing a pattern shift with maybe a breather for about 10 to 14 days after this system. And if that happens, then I think that we could have a bit of a breather for severe weather until the second half of April when things are really going to get active, kind of toward the core of the season. So that's what I'm looking at with the forecast, kind of a recap of last week, a discussion of my plans moving forward during the upcoming week. I hope you guys enjoy my weather reports. Really watching this day on Thursday across central southern Mississippi into central southern Alabama, maybe a little bit further east than that, but a lot of uncertainty associated with this one. Tuesday, there's still uncertainty with that as well. Probably need to extend this into southeastern Missouri. I already have it into southeastern Missouri, into southwestern Illinois. Definitely could be a target area there. Also some dry line action in western Oklahoma on Monday, but a little bit less likely of a tornado threat out there. So that's what we're looking at during this upcoming week. I hope you guys enjoy my weather reports. Never stop chasing.